The storm had barely ended when he saw her, a young homeless woman, bleeding in the alley, clutching a dying dog. He was a Navy SEAL, off duty, trying to heal his own scars. But fate had other plans. What began as an act of mercy soon led him to uncover a deadly empire, run by the same man who once betrayed his unit. This time, it wasn't just war. It was divine justice. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and the miracles God hides in the darkest places. The night in Flagstaff was heavy with the scent of wet pine and burnt gasoline, the kind of mountain air that carried both silence and memory. Caleb Moore walked alone down the narrow road leading out of town, his boots striking against the cracked asphalt, in a rhythm that used to calm him after war. He was on medical leave, his body mostly healed, but his mind still full of the noise of the last mission, the one that had buried his brothers in dust and taken his K9 shadow in a blast that replayed every time he closed his eyes. Tonight was supposed to be about quiet. He needed silence more than sleep. He carried no weapon, only the habit of scanning every shadow. Somewhere between the streetlights and the smell of rain, a sound cut through the night, a low growl followed by a muffled cry. It wasn't the sound of danger, it was the sound of desperation. Caleb froze, every instinct returning. He followed it down a side alley, where the flickering light from a broken sign revealed chaos in fragments. A woman crumpled against a dumpster, clutching a German shepherd whose body trembled with pain. Around her, 3 men staggered back, reeking of alcohol and violence. "Leave her," Caleb said, his voice low but carrying the weight of command that came from years of giving orders under fire. The men turned, one with a sneer too slow to hide fear. He muttered something about debts and charity cases. Caleb didn't argue. His movements were practiced. 1 step forward, 1 swing, 1 fall. The others scattered, half drunk and half aware that something colder than fear had entered that alley. When they were gone, Caleb knelt beside the woman. She couldn't have been much older than 30, her breath sharp and ragged, blood streaked down her temple, but she shielded the dog more than herself. "Don't call an ambulance," she whispered before he even spoke. "They won't take people like me." Her voice cracked on the last word. "People like you?" Caleb asked softly, though he already knew what she meant. "Poor," she said, then after a pause, "and black." She tried to lift the dog's head, but her hand shook. "They'll just leave me in a hallway again." He remembered field hospitals that did the same to soldiers too broken to save. The shepherd whined faintly. Caleb ran his hand over the animal's chest and felt the shallow rise and fall of strained lungs. The dog's eyes fluttered open, steady, defiant, even in agony. That look pierced him. He'd seen it before, in shadow, the moment before the explosion. He lifted both the woman and the dog without another word. She tried to protest, but her strength had already slipped away. He carried them out of the alley, past the neon hum of bars and the soft hiss of late traffic, toward his old pickup parked by the gas station. Inside the truck, the heater coughed to life. The woman pressed her face into her hands, whispering to herself. Caleb watched her from the corner of his eye as he drove toward the mountains. The rain turned the road to mirrors. "What's your name?" he asked. "Alana," she said after a while. "And him?" "Justice," she whispered, brushing her fingers along the dog's head. "He's all I've got." The name lingered in the cab like a ghost. Justice, a fitting word for an animal that had tried to fight off 3 men twice its size. "Those men," Caleb said, "they know you?" She nodded weakly. "Debt collectors. I borrowed to pay rent, lost my job, couldn't keep up. They took everything. My cabin out by the ridge, it's theirs now." The bitterness in her voice was quieter than grief. It was the sound of someone who had learned to stop expecting fairness. Caleb tightened his grip on the steering wheel. He'd seen entire cities burned for less cruelty. "You're safe now," he said, though he didn't fully believe it. She looked at him, her eyes searching his face for the truth behind his words. "You're a soldier, aren't you?" He nodded. "Navy SEAL." "Was? Was? Not sure anymore." She smiled faintly, the kind of smile people use when they've already accepted loss. "You sound like someone who's lost a war he still wants to fight." Caleb didn't reply. Outside, the forest thickened, tall pines closing over the road like sentinels. When he reached his cabin, a small wooden place buried in the trees, he helped her inside. It smelled of rain and old coffee, of solitude too long kept. He laid Justice on a blanket near the fire, then washed the blood from his own hands. Alana sat quietly, watching the flames. "You didn't have to help," she said. "Most people wouldn't." "Most people haven't seen what happens when no one does," Caleb replied. He cleaned the dog's wounds carefully, improvising with the supplies from his first aid kit. The shepherd flinched, but didn't resist. When Caleb met its eyes again, he saw no fear, only the unbroken discipline of a creature that had once been trained for loyalty, maybe even combat. The thought clawed at him. Could it be possible? No, he'd seen Shadow die. But when he pressed his palm to the dog's chest, something old and familiar stirred beneath the ribs, a rhythm he could never forget. Alana's voice broke the silence. "You've done this before," she said softly. "More times than I wanted to," he answered. "War?" He nodded. She studied him for a moment. "Then you know what it's like to lose everything." He looked into the fire, the light flickering across the scars on his hands. "You don't lose everything," he said quietly. "Just enough to know what matters." The words hung between them until the fire burned low. Alana leaned back against the couch, exhaustion overtaking fear. "Why did you leave the service?" she asked drowsily. Caleb thought of the desert wind, of comrades buried under collapsing walls, of Shadow's final bark before the flash. "Because I got tired of burying the good ones." The flames popped softly, sending embers into the dark. "And what now?" she murmured. "Now I try to remember what peace feels like." He turned to the window. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the forest glistening under the pale moon. For the first time in years, he felt something close to calm, but it didn't last. From the dog's collar, beneath the grime and torn leather, the glint of a faded insignia caught the firelight. Caleb's chest tightened. It was the same tag design used for SEAL K-9s in his old unit, custom made by the handlers. His fingers trembled as he touched it. Justice opened one eye, watching him silently, and Caleb felt the weight of recognition hit like a memory long buried. He wasn't sure if it was coincidence or fate, but he knew one thing: the quiet life he'd tried to build had just ended. Morning came quietly over the pine ridge, sunlight filtering through mist that still clung to the trees. Caleb Moore sat outside his cabin, his elbows on his knees, listening to the faint breathing of the woman and the dog inside. The night had been long, hours spent keeping them both alive. Alana had fallen asleep only after the fever broke, and the dog, Justice, lay beside her, his breathing steady but shallow. The forest was calm now, yet Caleb's mind was not. The old soldier in him had awakened, restless, alert, already anticipating trouble. He'd seen men like those from the alley before, organized enough to hunt, drunk enough to kill. They wouldn't let what happened last night go unanswered. He stepped back into the cabin and poured coffee into a metal mug. Alana stirred under the blanket. "Where are we?" she asked quietly. "Safe for now," Caleb replied. "My place. No one comes here unless they're lost." She sat up slowly, one hand resting on Justice's side. The dog opened his eyes, watching Caleb the way soldiers used to watch new commanders, measuring him, waiting to decide if trust was earned or not. "You stayed up all night?" she asked. Caleb shrugged. "Habit." He handed her the mug. "Drink. You'll need it." She took a cautious sip, her gaze lingering on the scars that ran across his knuckles. "You fought before." "So have you," he said. Her lips twitched. "Mine's a different kind of war." She hesitated, then spoke, her voice brittle. "Those men you saw, they're collectors for a man named Reed Talbot. He runs loans across the county. People borrow when they're desperate. They always end up owing more than they can pay." Caleb listened without interrupting. "I borrowed for medicine," she continued. "For my mother. She didn't make it, and when I couldn't pay, they took the cabin, said I could work it off. But when I refused—" She stopped. The silence that followed said more than words could. Justice lifted his head slightly, as if to remind her that she wasn't alone. Caleb nodded slowly. "And they'll come back. They always do." He turned to the window, watching sunlight crawl across the floorboards. "Then we'll be ready." Alana blinked, unsure if she'd heard him right. "You mean fight them?" "If they come here, yes. But first, we take something back." He looked at her. "Where's your cabin?" She hesitated, then gave a rough direction, 5 miles east, near an abandoned lumber road. "It's small," she said, "but it was mine." Caleb picked up his rifle, checked the chamber, and slung it across his shoulder. "Then let's make it yours again." Justice tried to stand, unsteady but determined. Caleb knelt and looked into the dog's eyes. "You stay here," he said firmly. Justice growled softly, low and defiant, as if refusing an order. Alana smiled weakly. "He doesn't like being left behind." "Neither did my old partner," Caleb murmured. They set out after noon, Alana guiding him through the winding trail that led back to her land. The walk was quiet, except for the occasional rustle of birds. She spoke once about her mother, about the way the illness had taken her slowly, and how Reed Talbot's men had taken the rest. Caleb said little, but something in his eyes hardened with every word. When they reached the clearing, the cabin appeared like a ghost of what it once was. Door broken, windows smashed, and the garden trampled into mud. Beer cans littered the porch. The anger in Alana's face wasn't loud, but it was deep. "They did this for fun," she whispered. Caleb crouched near the door, scanning tracks and cigarette butts. "They're sloppy," he said, "but armed." He looked around, assessing the terrain. "You know how to shoot?" She shook her head. "Then stay close." Before they could plan further, a truck engine echoed from the dirt road beyond the trees. Caleb motioned her to hide behind a fallen log. 2 men stepped out of the truck, one with a shotgun, the other laughing, as he kicked the door open wider. "Boss said grab anything left worth taking," the first man said. "And if she shows up, then we remind her who owns this place." Caleb's jaw tightened. He moved fast and silent, the way seals were trained to move through smoke and chaos. Within seconds, the man with the shotgun was disarmed and the other was face first in the dirt. Alana stared, stunned at the speed. "We're not done," Caleb said. He pulled the first man up by his collar. "Where's Talbot?" The man spat blood and fear. "Town, South Warehouse, near the train yard." Caleb let him go with a shove. "Tell your boss he's next." They spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning what was left of the cabin. Alana swept broken glass into a pile while Caleb boarded the windows. For the first time, the place looked less like a ruin and more like a promise. Justice limped up the path at dusk, defying his own injuries, tail low but eyes fierce. Caleb couldn't help but smile. "I told you to rest," he said, but there was no anger in it. Justice sat beside him, watching the tree line like a sentinel. The bond between them felt inevitable, as if the war had merely paused to bring them together. Alana leaned against the doorway, exhaustion softening her face. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Caleb didn't answer immediately. "Because I've seen what happens when good people lose their homes to men who think power makes them right." He stared into the distance. "And because I owe someone, a partner who died protecting me. Maybe this makes it right." Night fell. They lit a small fire outside, the forest whispering around them. Alana spoke about her dreams of buying back her mother's land some day. Caleb said little, but his silence carried more than comfort. It carried purpose. When she finally drifted to sleep, he stayed awake, studying the map he'd drawn in the dirt. The warehouse, near the train yard, the routes in and out, the places where men like Talbot would hide. He traced a line from the ridge to the town, the old soldier in him alive again. Beside him, Justice lay awake too, eyes glowing faintly in the firelight, as if sensing what was coming. Caleb reached down and rested a hand on the dog's head. "We end this soon," he whispered. Justice's tail moved once, quiet as a heartbeat. In that moment, the forest felt like it was holding its breath. Somewhere beyond the trees, the sound of another engine started, low, distant, and coming closer. Caleb rose slowly, eyes narrowing toward the dark. "They found us," he murmured. The night in the Arizona forest was sharp and cold, the kind that carried every sound through the trees like whispers. Caleb Moore crouched beside the window of Alana's reclaimed cabin, tightening the wire of a homemade snare. The moon cast long silver shadows over the ground, and in those shadows he had placed his traps, silent, efficient, the kind taught to men who were expected to fight alone. Justice lay a few feet away, ears twitching, alert to every movement. They had been preparing since dawn. Alana was now safely hidden in Caleb's own cabin, miles away, with enough food and water to last 2 days. He'd told her this was the safest way, but deep down he knew it was more about protecting her from what he intended to do tonight. He checked the last trigger line near the porch and moved back inside, scanning the room one last time. The cabin was no longer a home. It was bait. On the table sat a dim lantern and 2 coffee mugs, as if life had simply continued, as if no one was waiting in the dark with a rifle trained on the door. The stillness before violence was something Caleb knew well. It had its own weight, its own rhythm. He exhaled slowly and waited. Hours passed. Then the sound came, engines grinding against the dirt road, too many for a visit. Headlights flashed through the trees. He counted at least 3 trucks. Justice growled low, the sound vibrating through the floorboards. Caleb whispered. "Easy, boy. Wait." The first truck stopped by the gate. Voices followed, gruff, mocking, confident. "He's here somewhere," one man said. "Boss wants him alive. Says he's ex-military, might know something." Another laughed. "Alive won't last long." Caleb's jaw tightened. He had learned long ago that cruelty liked to speak out loud, right before it died. The door burst open. 2 men entered, flashlights sweeping the room. Caleb stayed hidden behind the staircase, his breath steady. When the first man stepped onto the loose plank, the snare snapped around his ankle, yanking him off balance and slamming him hard against the floor. The second spun around, raising his gun, but Justice launched from the shadows, knocking the man to the ground before the shot could fire. The growl that filled the cabin wasn't rage, it was something colder, disciplined, trained. Caleb moved fast, disarming the fallen man, pressing the barrel of his own rifle to his chest. "Where's Talbot?" he demanded. The man spat blood. "Already dead," he hissed. "Killed an hour ago." Caleb froze for half a second. "By who?" "Ask your old friend," the man sneered. "Kane." The name hit him like a bullet to the ribs. Victor Kane. Commander Victor Kane, his former SEAL instructor, presumed dead after the ambush in Jabal Province 3 years ago. Caleb had seen the footage himself, the black smoke rising from the ruins, the silence that followed when command confirmed no survivors. Kane had been the man who taught him how to survive, how to lead, how to obey. Now somehow, that same man was behind Reed Talbot's operation. "You're lying," Caleb said. The man smiled through broken teeth. "You think we served Talbot? He was just a puppet. Kane owns everything now, the drugs, the guns, the debt. You should have stayed dead with the rest of them." Before Caleb could question further, a grenade rolled through the open door. He dove, dragging Justice with him, as the explosion ripped through the wall, splintering wood and filling the air with fire and dust. When he regained his vision, the 2 captured men were gone, either killed or escaped. Outside, silhouettes moved between the trees. He grabbed his rifle, fired twice, dropped 2 of them, then ducked back inside. Blood trickled down his temple, but he barely felt it. "Come on," he whispered to Justice. They slipped out the back, moving through the smoke toward the creek behind the cabin. The firefight grew louder. Bullets tore through branches. Caleb fired in short bursts, covering their retreat, his training taking over completely. He wasn't the man who fixed fences and drank coffee by sunrise anymore. He was the SEAL again, the hunter who had learned that survival meant outthinking death itself. They reached the ravine. Justice stumbled, but kept moving, his loyalty carrying him beyond exhaustion. Caleb crouched behind a fallen log, reloading, his breath fogging the air. He looked toward the distant flames rising from the cabin and knew the old life he tried to build was gone for good. When the shooting stopped, he waited 5 minutes before moving. The forest was silent again, but it was the silence of aftermath, not peace. He dragged himself and the dog through the creek to wash off the scent of blood and gunpowder. His arm burned from shrapnel, but he ignored it. By dawn, he had reached the trail leading back to his own cabin. Alana ran out as soon as she saw him, her face pale, eyes wide with fear. "You're hurt," she said. "Just a scratch," he lied. She looked at Justice, who was limping, his fur darkened with soot and ash. "What happened?" Caleb sat down heavily on the porch. "Talbot's dead, and the man behind him. He's someone I used to know." "Who?" "A SEAL, Victor Kane, my commanding officer. They said he died overseas." Alana covered her mouth. "And now?" Caleb looked toward the mountains where the smoke from the burning cabin still rose faintly into the sky. "Now, he's building something here, something worse than the war we left behind." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metal tag he'd found near one of the bodies. It bore an engraving, Scorpion Order, the same mark he had seen years ago on the men who killed his K9 shadow. His hand clenched around it until his knuckles turned white. "What will you do?" Alana asked. Caleb didn't answer. He stood slowly, the stiffness of his injuries barely hiding the fire in his eyes. "I'm going to find him," he said, "and I'm going to end this." Justice raised his head at the tone, a low rumble forming in his throat, as if echoing the same promise. Caleb turned to Alana. "Stay here. Whatever happens next, you don't follow me." She wanted to argue but saw something in him, something final. He stepped off the porch, rifle slung across his shoulder, and disappeared into the trees with Justice at his side. The forest swallowed them whole, the sound of their footsteps fading into silence. But as Alana turned back toward the cabin, she noticed something glinting under the truck parked nearby. A thin metal wire stretched tight across the ground. Her breath caught. "Caleb!" she shouted, but the warning came too late. A distant explosion thundered through the woods. The forest smelled of smoke and iron. Caleb Moore woke to the echo of his own name, somewhere between dream and pain, his head pounding and his body half buried beneath splinters of wood. The explosion had torn through the trees and sent him flying down the slope behind the cabin. For a long while he didn't move, just listened to the drip of rain on leaves, the distant crows, the ragged breathing beside him. Justice. The dog was alive, though limping and bloodied, one paw pressed protectively against Caleb's chest. When Caleb tried to sit, the world tilted sideways. He tasted metal. The ringing in his ears was relentless. "Easy," he murmured, reaching for the dog. "We made it." The forest didn't answer. He looked back toward where the cabin had been. Nothing but smoke and ash remained. If Alana was still there, he couldn't tell. He staggered to his feet, swaying, and whistled once, sharp. Justice limped to his side, pressing close for balance. They had been through worse, but never alone like this. By the time Caleb reached what was left of his main cabin, dusk had settled. Alana was outside, shaken but alive, her face streaked with soot. She ran toward him, her voice cracking with relief. "I thought you were dead." He dropped his rifle and caught her arms before she collapsed. "You called out," he said. "That's what saved me." Her eyes widened. "I shouted your name after the blast. You heard that?" He nodded, though the sound had been faint, half memory, half instinct. She stared at the bruises along his face. "You shouldn't be standing." "I've had worse," he muttered, easing himself down on the porch. Justice lay beside him, already licking at his own wounds with stubborn patience. Inside, Alana cleaned Caleb's cuts with trembling hands. The silence between them was heavy, filled with questions neither dared to ask. Finally, she broke it. "Was it Kane?" Caleb nodded. "His men. They rigged the place before I even set the traps." He held up a small metal fragment, part of a detonator. "Military grade. He's not just hiding, he's preparing for something. You think he's building another unit?" "No," Caleb said darkly. "He's building a private army." That night, while Alana slept near the fire, Caleb sat awake cleaning his weapons. Each click of metal sounded like a heartbeat, counting down to something inevitable. Justice rested near the door, head up, eyes scanning the shadows. The dog had changed since the explosion, more alert, almost aware that the next fight would decide everything. Caleb's mind drifted back to the desert, to the last mission where Cain had vanished. He remembered the call to pull back, the confusion, the sound of betrayal in the radio before the bomb took Shadow's life. Back then, Caleb had believed Cain had been a casualty of chaos. Now he saw it clearly. Cain had orchestrated it, sacrificed his own men to vanish and rebuild. At dawn, a figure appeared at the tree line. Caleb lifted his rifle but lowered it when he saw the uniform jacket. The man raised his hand slowly, limping forward. "Easy, Moore. I'm not one of them." The newcomer was Eli Navarro, a former Navy intelligence operative who'd served under Cain before defecting after the Jabal incident. He looked older than Caleb remembered, haunted eyes, an arm that didn't bend right. "I heard the blast from 3 miles out," Eli said, breathing hard. "Cain's been watching you. He knows you're alive, and he's afraid." Caleb didn't reply right away. "You worked for him?" he said at last. "You know what he's planning." Eli nodded grimly. "He's running something called Project Scorpion, a covert network funded by cartels and private investors, training ex-soldiers, creating ghost operations across the border. You weren't supposed to find out." Caleb's fists clenched. "And Alana? The debts? The men? Talbot?" "All connected," Eli said. "Her debt was a front. Cain uses local loan networks to launder cash and recruit muscle. Anyone who resists becomes an example." Caleb paced, anger simmering beneath exhaustion. "Why tell me this now?" "Because he's moving," Eli said. "In 2 days, there's a convoy leaving the old airstrip west of town. Once it's gone, you'll never find him again." He handed Caleb a folded piece of paper, coordinates, hand-drawn and smudged. "That's where he'll be tomorrow night." Caleb studied it for a moment, then looked up. "You're coming with me." Eli shook his head. "I can't. Not since Jabal. I lost more than an arm that day." His voice cracked slightly. "But I can get you close." They spent the afternoon preparing. Alana insisted on helping despite Caleb's protests. She packed food, ammunition, and stitched a tear in his jacket. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "He'll keep coming," Caleb answered. "If I don't stop him, someone else will die for me." She met his gaze. "Then promise me one thing. Don't become him." The words hit harder than she knew. He nodded once, though he wasn't sure he could keep that promise. As night fell, Caleb and Eli loaded the truck. Justice leapt into the back seat, refusing to be left behind. The dog's eyes caught the glow of the dashboard lights, calm and fierce. They drove in silence through the forest roads, headlights slicing through mist. When they reached a ridge overlooking the valley, Eli pointed to a cluster of faint lights in the distance. "That's his base, guarded by mercs and ex-SEALs. You won't get far without alerting them." Caleb checked his rifle, his knife, his resolve. "Then I'll have to move before dawn." Before they could plan further, the radio in Eli's truck crackled to life. A cold voice came through, a voice Caleb hadn't heard in years. "You never learn when to quit, Moore." The voice was unmistakable. Victor Cain. "You think you're the only one who lost something out there?" the voice continued. "You think you're a hero, but heroes die forgotten. Come find me, boy. I'll be waiting." The transmission cut off, leaving only static. Eli's face turned pale. "He's baiting you," he said. Caleb stared at the radio, his pulse steady. Then he's about to find out what that costs. He started the engine again, the tires grinding against gravel as they descended toward the valley. The last thing Eli saw in the rearview mirror was the faint outline of Caleb's face illuminated by lightning, eyes fixed ahead, calm, determined, dangerous. Behind them, the storm began to roll in, thunder swallowing the road. The storm had rolled in before dawn, cloaking the Arizona valley in a restless gray. Caleb Moore crouched behind a rusted truck on the ridge, rain dripping from his hair, rifle resting steady on the hood. Below him stretched the abandoned airstrip Eli Navarro had marked, a scar of cracked concrete lined with hangars lit by the cold mechanical glow of floodlights. Beyond them, armed men moved like insects around crates marked with the insignia of Project Scorpion. Each box was a piece of Victor Kane's empire, guns, narcotics, and secrets wrapped in military discipline. Caleb exhaled slowly, the storm masking his heartbeat. Justice crouched beside him, tense but quiet, eyes locked on the base below. They had come too far for hesitation. Eli had stayed behind, setting up a comm line through an old police frequency. His voice came through the earpiece, rough and static-ridden. "You're 500 meters out. 2 patrols, 1 tower. If you move now, you've got 10 minutes before shift change." Caleb adjusted his sightline. "Copy." He glanced at Justice. "You ready?" The dog gave a low rumble, a soldier's answer. They descended through the mud and thorn brush, moving as one, man and K9, shadows in the rain. Every step felt like walking deeper into the past, into all the ghosts Kane had created. The first sentry went down silently. Caleb caught the man's body before it hit the ground, dragging him into the shadow of a cargo crate. The second patrol noticed nothing. By the time they reached the main hangar, thunder drowned out the sound of the lock snapping. Inside, rows of weapon crates stretched endlessly. Maps were pinned to the walls, routes spanning from Mexico to the Rockies. Caleb studied one briefly. Kane wasn't just running an operation, he was preparing a movement. The thought twisted something deep inside him. "He's building an army of lost men," he whispered. Justice stiffened, ears flicking back. Caleb followed his gaze to the far corner. Movement. A figure stepped out of the shadows, hands empty, voice calm. "Still the same sharp instincts, Moore?" Victor Kane looked older than memory, but carried himself like a man who had never once doubted his power. His uniform was unmarked, his face unreadable. "I knew you'd come," Kane said. "I made sure of it." Caleb kept his rifle steady. "You used to fight for something. What happened?" Kane smiled faintly. "I did fight for something, order, but the world stopped rewarding discipline, so I built my own." He gestured to the crates around them. "The weak need someone to rule them. You of all people should understand that." Caleb's jaw tightened. "You murdered your team." "I liberated them," Kane said simply. "They died so that I could create a future not bound by governments or politics. A world where soldiers aren't thrown away when the wars end." "And how many civilians did you burn for that dream?" Caleb asked. Kane's eyes flickered, something cold passing behind them. "Collateral! Every empire demands sacrifice." Before Caleb could respond, the door burst open, 2 mercenaries charging in. Justice launched forward, teeth flashing. Caleb's rifle barked twice, the first man falling instantly. The second turned on the dog, knife raised. Caleb tackled him mid-swing, the two men crashing against the wall. Pain flared across his ribs as the knife scraped past. He drove his elbow into the attacker's throat, sending him sprawling. When he turned back, Cain was gone. "Eli," Caleb hissed into the comm. "He's heading for the control tower." "Copy that," Eli's voice replied. "But listen, FBI's inbound. I got through to them using your transmission logs. 10 minutes tops. Don't die before then." Caleb allowed himself a short, grim smile. No promises. He sprinted through the rain, Justice limping but relentless beside him. The tower loomed ahead, its windows glowing faintly. Inside, Cain stood by a console, typing commands into an old flight terminal. "You really think you can stop what's coming?" he asked without turning. "You kill me, another takes my place." "Maybe," Caleb said, "but not today." Cain turned, drawing a pistol. The two men stared at each other, teacher and student, soldier and ghost. Then they moved. The first shot went wide, ricocheting off metal. The second grazed Caleb's shoulder. He fired back, catching Cain's arm and sending the gun spinning away. They crashed into the console, sparks flying. Cain fought like a man trained to end lives efficiently, without hesitation. But Caleb fought like a man who had lost everything already. Justice lunged, clamping onto Cain's leg, pulling him off balance. Caleb pinned him to the floor, rifle pressed to his throat. Rain hammered against the windows. For a long moment, no one spoke. "Do it!" Cain rasped. "Finish it, soldier." Caleb's finger hovered over the trigger, but something stopped him. The echo of Alana's words. "Don't become him." The rage drained from his hands, replaced by something heavier. He lowered the rifle. "No," he said quietly. "You're not worth it." Cain's eyes flickered with confusion, then contempt. "Mercy is weakness." "Maybe," Caleb said, "but it's what makes us human." He pulled a set of zip ties from his belt, binding Cain's wrists as blue and red lights began flashing through the rain outside. The sound of sirens grew louder, FBI vehicles tearing down the dirt road. Cain's empire was ending. Caleb stepped back, breathing hard. "It's over." "You think you've won?" Cain muttered. "You've only delayed the inevitable." Caleb looked down at him. "Then I'll keep delaying it." Agent stormed the hangar moments later, led by Special Agent Maria Torres, a sharp-eyed woman whose reputation for dismantling domestic militias had made her both respected and feared. She assessed the scene quickly. Dead mercenaries, confiscated weapons, one bleeding Marine and his dog. "More, right?" she asked. He nodded. "You're lucky Navarro called when he did. We've been tracking this cell for months." She looked at Cain, now restrained and silent. "This one's been a ghost for years. We'll take it from here." Caleb gave a weary nod. "Make it count." When the agents left, the storm began to break. Caleb stood in the hangar doorway, the first hint of dawn spreading over the horizon. Alana arrived not long after, having followed the convoy against his orders. She found him leaning against a crate, eyes distant. "It's done," she whispered. "It's over." Caleb glanced at Justice, whose head rested against his leg, eyes finally calm. "For now," he said. She reached out, touching his hand. "You could stay," she offered softly. "Start over." Caleb looked toward the rising sun. "Maybe someday, but not yet." He crouched, resting his hand on Justice's head. "Come on, partner. Time to go home." As they walked away from the airstrip, the wind carried the smell of rain and cordite, but beneath it was something lighter. Freedom, fragile but real. Behind them, Cain was loaded into a van. still muttering about empires and destiny. Ahead, the road disappeared into light. Caleb didn't look back. When the storm clears and the echoes of gunfire fade, what remains is not the sound of victory, but the stillness of grace. Caleb Moore learned that even in the darkest corners of war and revenge, there is something greater moving through the chaos, something unseen yet deeply felt. Call it faith, call it mercy, call it the quiet voice of God whispering through the ruins. It is the reminder that no matter how broken the world becomes, light can still rise from the ashes. Justice's loyalty, Alana's courage, Eli's repentance, all of them were threads in the same divine tapestry. It wasn't coincidence that brought them together. It was providence. Perhaps every act of compassion, every refusal to surrender to hate is a small miracle. And sometimes God's miracles do not come with thunder or angels. They come in the steady heartbeat of a wounded dog, or in the trembling hands of a man who chooses mercy over vengeance. So if you are watching this, let this story remind you we are all soldiers in our own quiet battles, fighting loneliness, fear, injustice, or despair. But faith is the weapon that never runs empty. Whatever you're facing today, don't give up. There is a light waiting for you too, a dawn only faith can bring. If this story touched your heart, please share it so others may find hope through it. Comment your thoughts and tell us how faith or love has guided you through your hardest days. And don't forget to subscribe to join our family of stories that remind us every soul deserves redemption, every battle can find peace, and every miracle, no matter how small, is a sign that God is still with us.